The APIs you've built didn't just help with external client onboarding, those helped also with integrating new systems and sped up the entire process. But they also served as the universal data layer, powering everything. One of those things was the internal partner portal. So, why is it so critical for internal tools and external clients to pull from the exact same single source of truth?
Okay, that's an interesting question because there are a lot of ways to handle this, right? Sometimes it's possible to actually have multiple databases where you could have a read-only database and a write-only database. But for this instance, we'll maintain a single database layer, which somewhat simplifies the process. So the importance of having a single source of truth in this case is that, say for example, right, we may not necessarily know through what channel an order or a message has been ingested. It could have been through the legacy system, it could have been through the modern system. And when that message has been ingested, it may be possible that we may want to have some customer reps or some customer support wanting to make some modifications to those orders through the through the spot that we have. So it's important that they're able to reference the same source of truth, because we don't want a situation whereby, say for example, a client has sent in an order and the CS rep or customer support wants to make a modification to that order. However, if we have different sources of data, it may be possible that by the time the CS rep is actually going to update that data, for some reason, some other system in the middleware, in our integration layer, might have made a change to the state of that order. So you have a situation where the CS rep is dealing with stale information, and the information that is actually coming from the client or from the external integrator has changed. You could have all sorts of problems with that. You may go ahead to try to cancel an order that has already been shipped, or try to provide inventory information that is out of date. So by having a single source of truth, we're able to eliminate these sort of risks. I mean, there are other ways to do it too, but for our case, this was how we implemented it, just having a common source of truth and ensuring that we have enough guardrails in place to make sure that that source of truth is not overwhelmed with a lot of requests. We had things like rate limiting, a lot of authentication and authorization layers before anyone can go into either read or update the data. We also have some common other database best practices to ensure that the integrity of the data is well maintained.
Yeah, like those guardrails are, those are crucial. Without
Very
those, you
important.
can't import.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't want anybody going to make a change to data, especially when you're dealing with data that's coming from an external source. The person needs to have the right amount of privileges and the right level of knowledge and understanding to be able to make those sort of changes.
Yeah. So, you and your team, you've built 22 REST endpoints to serve external clients, but you also use them for the data layer. So, what should business leaders know when building internal and external APIs?
Okay. Good question. So, it depends on the organization, and it also depends on kind of security policies and practices they have in place. We always have the basic level of security practices that by default API should be secured. But when it comes to building, for this particular scenario, for this specific client, when it comes to building internal and external APIs, for the external APIs, there should be a lot of emphasis on security. These days we're talking about different types of cyber threats, cyber attacks, especially something like a DDoS, which is a distributed denial of service, where you have multiple bots. With AI, it's now a lot easier to automate these sort of cyber attacks. So the first thing that should be emphasized when building APIs, especially for external clients, is that there should be a lot of investment in security, in securing the APIs, in reducing the surface area exposed to cyber attacks. So for the external API, that is the first point of call. The next thing that has to require a lot of attention is ensuring scalability, right? During peak periods, maybe there's a special promotion or a special time of the year, these APIs tend to be hit very hard, with a lot of requests coming in from clients from different locations. So there needs to be emphasis on the willingness to invest in the right type of infrastructure to support volume and load during peak periods. Now, coming to internal APIs, right? For the internal APIs, I think it's important to have for the business leaders, I think it's important to have certain standards, right? Because in a lot of cases, these organizations have a lot of microservices interacting within the organization that are not necessarily exposed to external clients. So it's important to have standards and practices that could help ease interoperability between these different services. So business leaders need to understand the need to set policies, to set standards on how APIs should be built internally and how they should be designed to help support interoperability. Another thing I would say is that there needs to be investments in observability and monitoring tools, because most of the time you have a suite of services that are running internally, and if a single service goes down, you might not necessarily know it from the get-go. It's only at some point down the workflow that you then realize that the service is down. But you don't want to wait till you get to that point. You just need to invest in observability, alerting and monitoring tools. Yeah.
So with observability, like early this week, I was reading some research that the amount businesses spend on observability has grown, quite a lot in the last years. But the difference between the last year and this year was like 8 or 7% of their IT budget. So that's a big jump, and in some cases it takes even a quarter of the entire budget. So just imagine how much observability actually impacts everything.
Absolutely, no, it's very important. Let me give you an example, right? I think within the last 2 or 3 years, we've had major outages. We had the outage that had to do with CrowdStrike, which took down airports, right?
And like most businesses.
Most businesses went out. Banks were out of service. Airports were out of service. Recently, about 6 months ago, we had another outage in Amazon. One of the availability zones was also out of service, and that brought down half the internet. So when you have sufficient observability tools, you're able to see a problem starting to rise before it gets to a point that is critical. And I think the events of the past 2 or 3 years has sort of spooked a lot of business leaders, and they're starting to realize the importance of investing heavily in observability, being able to identify threats, being able to identify downtimes and risks before they get to a critical point. So investing in those sort of tools is very important, and it's very interesting to know that the budget for such investments has significantly increased in the past year.
Yeah, it's increasing, but there will be more problems coming with the amount of AI traffic hitting everyone. Interesting times we live in.
Very interesting.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felek. It's been great talking with you.
Same.
Hope to see you some other time.